Welcome to this third session of the 2022 edition of the International Forum on One Korea, organized during Korean Liberation Day. This series of international fora on One Korea provide a platform to promote international support for a Korean-led campaign for One Korea by highlighting the benefits of a free and unified Korea for both North and South, the wider Asia-Pacific region, and the world. The clearly stated goal of this forum is a free and unified Korea, starting with the end in mind as an effective means to approach the seemingly intractable challenges that have stymied negotiations on the future of the peninsula to date. A key to the realization of a free and unified Korea will be the economic integration framework. Such a framework must be imagined in advance to ensure an immediate, deliberate, inclusive process that can guide stakeholders when the inevitable opportunity for a free, unified Korea arises. The world was caught by surprise and unhelpful at the dissolution of the Soviet Union and is currently dealing with misunderstanding, mistrust, and now conflict 30 years later. It's urgent that an actionable multi-sectoral economic contingency plan be in place for the inevitable establishment of a free and unified peninsula. I'm joining this session from Seoul in the fantastic new Park 1 complex that was just inaugurated yesterday. There was an in-person plenary this morning and a session on peace and security earlier this afternoon. We're the third session in this One Korea Forum. And I must say that the a real change from previous fora is that the economic consideration was mentioned very frequently by I'd say at least a majority of the speakers in both sessions. So we're gaining momentum and in the awareness of the importance of the economic considerations here. So I'm delighted to introduce a remarkable international panel this morning or evening, depending where you're joining us from, to address this challenge. For the sake of time, I'll give just a brief introduction to the speakers, but please do find their bios on the GPF website and other platforms. They're all quite remarkable, and we're very grateful to have them with us today. This initiative is engaging the international community in the vision of this free, unified Korea. However, it is a Korean-led process. So for that reason, we'll begin with experts from the Republic of Korea. Our first speaker today is Dr. Chong-soo Park. He's the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Northern Economic Cooperation. He previously served as the president of the Northeast Asian Community Culture Foundation. He has studied in the UK and earned his PhD in St. Petersburg, Russia. Dr. Park brings rich international research and experience to this exploration of the future homeland on the future homeland on the Korean Peninsula. Welcome, Dr. Chong-soo Park.
So in the process of unification of the Korean Peninsula, I would like to point out several problems. And in my presentation, I will talk about why I focus on the Tuman River estuary on the border among North Korea, Russia, and China for unification of the Korean Peninsula, and how we need to proceed with this project and how the Yoon-seok government can promote this project. First, let me touch upon what is the problem in the process of peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. The Korean Peninsula issue is basically a problem within the Korean people between the two Koreans, but it has the duality of being a diplomatic issue that requires consideration of the relations between neighboring countries. The two Koreas have been promoting various cooperative projects such as the Kaesong Industrial Complex and Mountain Kumgang tourism business. However, all these cooperative projects ended in failure. And as a result, we learned that no cooperative project can be carried out stably and continuously only with the resolve of the two Koreas. Neighboring powers exert absolute influence on the Korean Peninsula issue. However, due to the disagreement and conflicting interests of each country, it was not easy to reach a consensus among different countries. In particular, the atmosphere of reconciliation and cooperation was heightened during the Moon Jae-in administration, with 3 summits between the US, North Korea, and 4 summits not only between the two Koreas but also North Korea and China for the first time. However, the situation on the Korean Peninsula has entered a long dark tunnel after the US-North Korea summit in Hanoi in 2019. So for peace and unification on the Korean Peninsula, it is necessary to come up with a plan that is agreed upon at home and abroad to ensure continuity. So I would like to suggest that we focus on the Tuman River estuary on the North Korea, Russia, and China border for the bridgehead for peaceful unification of the Korean Peninsula. First, from a geopolitical point of view, the borderland is a transboundary space that is both a barrier and a passage. However, as the importance of regions is growing and becoming more important than countries today, there is a trend to recognize the cross-border region as a regional state that will replace the nation state in the future. Professor Robert Scalapino of the University of Berkeley in the United States pointed out that a cross-border economic development zone in the northern part of the Korean Peninsula, Jilin province in China, and the Tuman River area bordering Russia's far east border for functional integration and regional economic development in North Korea as the optimal area for economic development. And from a geo-economic point of view, the estuary of the Tuman River is a junction zone between Russia's eastern policy, China's One Belt, One Road policy, North Korea's all-inclusive economic route, the United Nations Greater Tuman Initiative or GTI, and South Korea's Northern Policy. The Hasan area at the estuary of the Tuman River is a treasure trove of waterfront parks and ecotourism resources, such as National Safari Leopard Park, the largest Lotus Lake, and Slavianka Beach, and is a key hub for logistics and transportation in Northeast Asia centered on Kraskino. And from an international political point of view, the North Korea-China-Russia border region is the homeland of Balhae, which prospered for 230 years, and in modern history, China's territory in this region was incorporated into Russia with the signing of the Treaty of Beijing in 1860. In addition, Japan established state of Manchuria in 1932, but lost its leadership in Northeast Asia due to its defeat in the battle between the Soviet Army in August 1945. The United Nations Tuman River Basin Development Plan has been at a standstill for 30 years since its launch in 1991 due to conflicts of interest between neighboring countries. In particular, one of the main reasons that this project didn't gain much momentum was that Russia took a passive position about the development of this region. And from the perspective of the Korean national history, Joseon's Admiral Lee Sun-shin fought and won the Battle of Nokdun-do in 1587 against the Yeojin tribe of the north, and 13 families of North Hamgyong province crossed the Tuman River for the first time in 1863 and settled in Hasan, Russia. And during the Japanese occupation, it was the base of the independence movement. And it was the site where An Jung-gun formed an alliance with 11 anti-Japanese fighters in Kraskino on February 7, 1909. And the Najin-Hasan project of South and North Korea and Russia was recognized as an exemption from the UN sanctions against North Korea and Russia, after the leaders of Korea and Russia signed the Memorandum of Understanding for the Najin-Hasan Logistics Cooperation Project in November 2013, the pilot transport was carried out 3 times through Najin port, but it was suspended due to North Korea's nuclear test. Then how can we develop the estuary of the Tuman River? The Tuman River estuary on the border between North Korea, Russia, and China, which is still left underdeveloped due to the historical trauma of tensions and conflicts, will be developed as an international tourist destination and an industrial complex in the future. This project can be used as a bridgehead for reform and opening up to North Korea by reducing security risks in Northeast Asia, by strengthening cross-border exchanges and cooperation at a time when new Cold War atmosphere is heightened due to the Ukraine war. The top priority of this project is to build an infrastructure for nurturing the tourism industry. By constructing a transboundary international airport in this area, it is possible to build a three-port function that combines rail, port, land, and air. One example we can benchmark from is Europe's major airport, which has transformed a conflict zone into a metropolitan area of peace and prosperity. Basel International Airport is a European hub airport operating in multiple countries, including France, Germany, and Switzerland, which opened in 1947. The region emerged as a metropolitan area in January 2008 and has now been transformed into a transboundary peace and prosperity zone with 5.8 million passengers annually and 50,000 daily commutes across borders. And the airport construction in the Tuman River estuary can be promoted as a joint project of Russia and South Korea to create aviation demand. Also, North Korea can indirectly participate with its labor force, and China can make investment, and Western countries, companies, United States, and Japan can gradually participate to create a large-scale industrial complex behind the airport. Then how can the Yoon government promote this project? As you are well aware, South Korea is one of the 48 countries that participate in economic sanctions against Russia due to the Ukraine crisis. And now South Korea is designated as a non-friendly country of Russia, and its relations with North Korea and China have also deteriorated. So at the national level, normalization of relations with North Korea, China, and Russia may take a considerable period of time. Therefore, this economic cooperation project should be pursued at the level of public diplomacy or private diplomacy rather than the traditional state-led diplomacy method. Beijing Airport project took the same approach, with local governments taking the lead and central governments in France, Germany, and Switzerland taking part, and lastly, the EU got involved in the project. I think this approach will make the project more feasible. Then what is a method that the Yoon government can take in promoting the public diplomacy? I think at first, private organizations can take part, followed by the participation of local government, central government, and the international organizations such as the UN. And cooperation field can be progressively expanded from non-political realms such as history, culture, and tourism to other spheres. Given that Russia is intent on making this region a tourism cluster, I think this idea is very doable. And then the cooperation can be expanded to economic and political spheres. Tourism infrastructure can be constructed first, followed by development of sub-regions, hinterland, and metropolitan areas. This approach may take time, but present a more stable approach. So the Presidential Committee on Northern Economic Cooperation I belong to visited Russia last year and met with the governor of Primorsky Krai, the governor of Hassan, and the vice minister of economic development and other relevant ministers to discuss the plan. And as a result, we were able to coordinate the plan to create a tourism cluster in the Hassan region. And on March 1st, 2022, jointly with the Russian Primorsky Krai and the Far East Arctic Development Ministry, we committee prepared a proclamation ceremony for the commencement of the tourism cluster project in the Hassan region. But unfortunately, the outbreak of the Ukraine war on 24th of February put this event on hold indefinitely. The Yoon government is focused on strengthening the US-ROK alliance. And I believe if the US take the lead in this project and the UN actively participate in the project, this can gain a lot of momentum. The Greater Tuman River Development Plan, or GTI, is now at a standstill. And I hope the United States can take the lead in creating a free economic zone in the border region. If this region becomes a free economic zone, then this can be a bridgehead for reform and opening up towards North Korea, and can contribute to permanent peaceful coexistence zone, not only on the Korean Peninsula, but also in Northeast Asia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Park. That was a fascinating historical perspective with this Greater Tumen initiative that we've looked at before, but you have presented some very unique, creative, and sounds very practical proposals for the region and a regional approach. So very, very grateful to receive that, and looking forward to how that develops. And it's good to know that this Presidential Committee on Northern Economic Cooperation is in good hands. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Kwang-kyu Nam. He's professor and director of the Center of North Korea Studies at the Asiatic Research Institute at Korea University. Dr. Nam is also the president of Maebong Institute for One Korea. He's a very well-known author on North Korea issues and a familiar presence on this topic in the Korean mass media. And I had a great chance to meet him and watch his interactions this morning. So we are very fortunate to have your input today. You have the floor, Dr. Nam.
Yes, thank you, John Dickson. Let me introduce myself then. My name is Nam Kwang-kyu, the director of the Unification and International Peace in Korea University, South Korea. I would like to topic on the International Finance Hub in Yeouido to prepare for the unification course for One Korea. The United One Korea can be an important opportunity to seek an economic community in Northeast Asia. Due to the strength of One Korea's economic power, the formation of an economic community in Northeast Asia can begin in earnest. In order to strengthen close economic cooperation and human exchanges among the Northeast Asian countries, It is also possible to establish railway connections between Northeast Asian countries and undersea tunnels connecting the sea and land. A single Northeast Asian economic community can be created by expanding human and material exchanges centered on energy cooperation in various period and free trade agreements. In addition to the global economic structure is currently being changed by the first industry, and Korea and China are leading in this field. So it can have the vitality of the global economy in the 21st century. As One Korea is expected to emerge rapidly as a logistic hub connecting the continent and the ocean, One Korea will serve as a transportation for free trade connecting the Pacific Rim and the continental Europe. One Korea means the emergence of a strong economic community on the Korean Peninsula, and it means securing additional buffering countries that can handle the global economic crisis together. It's my opinion. With the removal of obstacles that could not be promoted due to North Korea through One Korea, large projects linked to the North Korean region, and the three-way economic cooperation between South Korea, North Korea, and Russia can be realized. Along with the connection of the longitudinal railway on the Korean Peninsula and the Siberian of the longitudinal railway on the Korean Peninsula and the Siberian longitudinal railway. South Korea's technology and capital, North Korea's labor force, Russia's resource and the land will be linked to agricultural development and so on. The another field can be more expanded there, I think. Furthermore, Russia and Mongolia can accelerate the incorporation of East Asian economy through One Korea, and international economic cooperation issues such as maritime cooperation in the East Sea and the development of the East Sea community can also be active as we saw. However, in order to realize One Korea, the cost of unification and development necessary for the unification process and the first unification development of North Korea are required. As a result of estimating the cost of the unification, considering that the unification process takes 10 years, if we guess, it is estimated that the cost of unification will cost at least 250 billion to up to 2 trillion. It cost 25 million and 200 billion per year, respectively. Then, when it comes to how to finance this enormous unification cost, one alternative is to build an international financial hub in Korea from now on, I think so. Korea is at the advantage of Japan's undeveloped financial system and information system, and compared to Singapore's pro-China and expensive materials and land fee, the infrastructure to attract financial hubs is highly competitive in South Korea. In 2020, the Korean government's National Balanced Development Committee proposed that it could continue to support Asian financial hub policies with plans of the next 30 years by designing Yeouido Special Zone. Yeouido has secured its potential as a special financial zone as private banks and the securities firms are concentrated along with the state-run banks such as Korean Development Bank and Export-Import Bank of Korea. As an industrial cluster that combines Yeouido finance and the post-industrial revolution, it has appropriated elements for digital finance and the fintech locations. I think so. It has high IT technology and is located close to Incheon International Airport, an Asian aviation hub. With the Yeouido fintech craze attempt to combine finance and innovative technologies are active. And they are also Park One. Yesterday, we have some good ceremony for the opening ceremony. Park One, Yeouido landmark buildings that are trying to attract international finance, supported by the outer finance abroad. If these factors lead to linking the future reconstruction plans of apartment in Yeouido with financial infrastructure, Yeouido can have infrastructures, location, technology, and the future competitiveness as an international financial hub in many ways. Cities called international financial centers are home to banks, securities firms, investment firms, and the consulting firms, which are financial institutes, as like John Yeouido. There are New York, which was formed by the development of the stock market, and Chicago, which was formed naturally by the development of the futures market, and London, which was naturally formed as the world's financial center, and Hong Kong and Singapore, which have formed a fiscal and institutional basis as the United Kingdom's Asian trading basis. There is also Shanghai, which was formed by expansion of financial demand centered on the Chinese trade. So my conclusion is that in Korea, Yeouido has appropriate location requirements as an international financial hub, is my opinion. Thank you for your listening. My topic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nam. That perfectly complements Dr. Park's presentation before yours, a regional development project supported by a new regional financial hub centered here where we are having our session right now in Yeouido as part of Seoul. A lot of that conversation came up. I remember when the Chinese government decided to abandon its one country, two systems promise on the 50-year promise with Hong Kong. So, thank you for bringing that to our attention. I think there's tremendous potential, and we look forward to seeing that develop. Those first two presentations are very complimentary and thrilling to consider and think about. Thank you. Thanks very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Craig Steffensen, an independent consultant specializing in program design and project management. He's a consultant to the World Bank, Asia Development Bank, and USAID after a lifetime of experience in those agencies. These large multilateral institutions move slowly, but are critical to a successful transition to an integrated economy on the peninsula. Very grateful to have you with us, and please join me. Welcome, Mr. Craig Steffensen.
Thank you, John. And it's great to be able to join all of you today. Let me start with a disclaimer. I worked for the Asian Development Bank for over 20 years, as well as with the World Bank and some other places. And I just have to say up front that my views do not necessarily represent those of any of the IFIs where I've worked. But I am able to comment on the issues and challenges that North Korea must face if it wishes to join the IFIs one day, and what it can do now to become a member of the IFI community. First of all, any such decision on whether North Korea will become a member of the IMF or the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank or the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development or the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank depends really on achieving sufficient political support from member countries in those organizations. Accepting a country as a new member is not a decision that the ADB president, for example, might take, or ADB's board of directors. It really requires a lot of backroom politicking by any country that aspires to become a member in one of these institutions. And it's not necessary really to submit an application in order for those discussions to begin. And this is something that North Korea could undertake today if it wanted to, simply to sound out some of its friends and neighbors on whether they would be supportive of their membership should the opportunity arise. I might add that historically, looking at Russia, for example, Vietnam, Poland, Mongolia, East Timor, and some others, it's not just political circumstances that are important, but key really is the willingness of any prospective member to pursue relatively open and market-oriented economic policies. So that's a key test as well. Something that might be discussed now and not wait until later. That is to see if there's willingness on the part of the authorities in Pyongyang to undertake the types of reforms that these institutions might support. The experience of China, which joined the IFIs in the early 1980s, shows that a great deal can be accomplished when a government commits itself to fundamental economic policy reform. As I said, it's not a precondition, but it really is essential for the relationship that we might have to prove successful. When the Chinese embarked on their economic reforms under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping, the IFIs provided substantial assistance, but nothing compared to what was required. But the willingness of the Chinese leadership to undertake the kinds of economic policy changes that could make our assistance effective 30 years later, 40 years later, has proved instrumental. Based on my own experience in Afghanistan and Myanmar and Cambodia, I think that membership at some point, when the overall political economic relationship is normalized, membership would be offered as part of a grand bargain involving agreements on political and security issues. The DPRK would, of course, have to formally apply for membership, and then technical discussions would begin to assemble data on the economy and to determine the appropriate size of its quota in the IMF and the World Bank and ADB and others. And only when this process is concluded is formal membership finalized. Typically, that process requires 1 or 2 years to complete. But to the extent that data is part and parcel of this equation, data on the North Korean economy could be shared now to allow the type of economic analysis that will be required at some point in the future to begin to save time. The more information on the North Korean economy that's forthcoming, the easier it is for people to understand the situation and to make recommendations accordingly. I could talk about possible models for the type of relationship that might emerge. I think China, Vietnam, and the Central Asian republics stand out. they were for the most part successful, but ultimately what will emerge, is an approach that meets North Korea's specific needs. My view is that agriculture and forestry would take priority over other sectors, given needs to ensure that North Korea can feed its people. And health, water, and sanitation might also be addressed with some urgency. But the foundations for the emergence of a private sector, and perhaps in the medium term for state enterprise reform, are also areas where I think the IFIs could be very helpful. But only when North Korea opens up and provides more information will it be possible to prioritize, what's really needed for a North Korean approach to an economic transition. On assistance that could be provided from the international community, this is my last comment. We're really a drop in the bucket compared to what's required. I think Dr. Nam, was right when he said that at least 250 billion to upwards of $2 trillion will be required. If you look at the German reunification process, it's cost upwards of $2 trillion already. Some might say that process is still going on, but it's worked out, and some would say it contributed to an economic revival of Europe in the process. But it's not going to be cheap, and it's nothing that the international financial institutions could afford. But we are quite good at pulling in private investors who come in under our umbrella of assistance. So look for this multiplier effect of whatever we provide in terms of what we could bring to the to any reunification. Now I could go on, but I think my time is up. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Craig, thank you very much. Craig joined us on a panel about 3 years ago when the session was in the early morning in Korea and the evening in America. He's been based in Sweden for the last several years and got on at 3 in the morning. So I really appreciate your commitment to this work, Craig. And you brought up many important questions and considerations here that we'll look forward to following up with you on. Thank you very much for your presentation. Our next speaker is another, we've talked about time differences. Now even though Dr. Petrov's time is very similar to here, I think 1 hour different than Seoul, he's speaking from the winter time in Australia. He's the senior lecturer and dean at the International College of Management in Sydney. He studied Korean history and language at St. Petersburg State University, later obtained his PhD in history from the Australian National University. He has academic experience throughout the world and rich direct experience with North Korea. Please welcome Dr. Leonid Petrov.
Thank you very much, John. I hope I'm unmuted, and if possible, I'll share my screen, which probably will make the task for interpreters a little bit easy. But simply, I wanted to reflect on the most recent events of the last 5 months, almost 6 months since Russia attacked Ukraine, since international sanctions have been imposed on Russia, and how these changes potentially may change life on the Korean Peninsula. So usually I present a very positive slides, comments, and positive vision for the future. and this is the my favorite cover for the lovely picture, and which reflects the aspiration of all Korean people for unification. The Pongil Road in Pyongyang and the Panmunjom village in the south of the demilitarized zone. So when I talk about economic challenges and opportunities, my heart fills with sadness about what happened in the recent 5-6 months of this year, and what has been happening and going on in the previous years. Again, makes me feel rather pessimistic about the outcomes which Korea, North and South, may benefit from, and the challenges and are much more numerous than opportunities. So I'll start with the major changes and challenges which I believe directly affect Korea, North and South, and its neighbors. So I divided my analysis into the 3 dimensions: economic, political, and security. And of course, if we talk about economy, the first thing which the world, the region, and the Korean Peninsula still is recovering from was coronavirus pandemic. North Korea just announced that the great victory over coronavirus demonstrates some numbers of extreme vigilance against the virus, and of course under the leadership of Kim Jong-un, North Korea proclaims the victory, while South Korea is still has certain limitations on people travel and business and economic activity. The region is still recovering, and China is probably the best example to that, which stays under the certain number of cities still pursuing the policy of zero COVID, make it very difficult to trade with China, visit China, to do any business with China. And also international sanctions, which have been imposed against Russia, also make Korean Peninsula directly involved in trade, because Russian traders, citizens, even tourists who might go to South Korea cannot use their bank cards and cannot do direct business with South Korean counterparts. And North Korea remains closed, with closed borders, so there's not much businesses going on, while the war in Ukraine makes North Korean constructors and military personnel enthusiastic about going to eastern Ukraine and rebuilding the cities of puppet republics of Donetsk and Luhansk. So another opportunity for North Korea, but I'll talk more about opportunities in a moment. In relations with China, the Sino-US trade war, which was started by former President Donald Trump, continues, and Joe Biden did not alleviate those anxieties about trade with China, and Australia also suffered from a major sanctions which were imposed by Beijing on Australian imports. And Eastern Europe, the European Union countries also have major difficulties now with China because of its ambivalent attitude to the war in Ukraine, because of its potential secondary sanctions, which China may find itself if it continues dealing with Russia. So the political side is not much more positive, because we see that the end of the Moon Jae-in era in May left unresolved legacy for Hyun-seung president and his administration, particularly with the ending of era of no war. Now it's not clear what is happening. Is it back to war, or is the détente and reconciliation should or may recover at some stage? And the dialogue which former President Donald Trump had with Kim Jong-un, some sort of bromance, has also ended with the arrival of Joe Biden's administration, which found itself in very antagonistic terms, both with Russia and China, which doesn't help in relations with North Korea at all. People's Republic of China just a few days ago published its white paper on Taiwan, which made the region of East Asia particularly combustible with possibility of new war. And that's why security becomes extremely acute topic in the discussion of both politics and economy, where the end of self-imposed moratorium, which ended with the departure of Donald Trump. We saw earlier this year and late last year the barrage of intercontinental ballistic missiles being launched, and we don't know when North Korea is going to test its next nuclear device, whether it's going to be underground, atmospheric, or underwater test. And the Russian aggression in Ukraine made or probably inspired China to think about the potential use of military in the unification with Taiwan. And all that makes us really concerned. So we can continue to talk about these challenges because they really affect the economy. The One Belt, One Road, about which everyone was so optimistic a few years ago, is now bypassing Russia. China does not want to be implicated for secondary or like violating the international sanctions or be a target of secondary sanctions. In that case, Trans-Siberian Railway becomes useless for any network, railway network like Trans-Korean network. So, you know, the dream of having the tunnel between Japan, the Korean Peninsula, and linking the exports from Japan and South Korea going to either China or Russia further to the Middle East and Western Europe is now a pipe dream. So the political landscape is also rather somber. We see that Xi Jinping is about to re-elected for another 10 years of rule in China for his position and as a general secretary of Chinese Communist Party. The 20th Congress is scheduled for October, as far as I understand, and longer than Xi Jinping going to be in power, both Putin and Kim Jong-un, who may stay in power indefinitely. They are not. They can change constitution. They can stay in power and manipulate with electoral process as they wish. All that again translates into the security issues, and perhaps if it's not only Taiwan, but if Taiwan is under attack, if South Korea is under direct threat from North Korea, what will Japan do in the time when US cannot protect Republic of China or Republic of Korea? Well, it's very likely that Japan will drop its Article 5 of the Constitution and go nuclear. So the opportunities look much more scarce given that the challenges are so numerous. So I believe that the opportunities for Republic of Korea and the surrounding nations is just to find, like for President Yoon, is it's an opportunity on this smoldering background of wars or prepared attacks is just to find the win-win trading opportunities with the neighbors. I know that Foreign Minister Park Jin is in China right now talking to his counterpart about the supply chains and strengthening the bilateral relations and promising not to implement the 3-no policy of Moon Jae-in, former president of Republic of Korea. But who knows, maybe they should find more opportunities. I mean, Republic of Korea, Republic of China, Japan, and the United States should trade more and form that semiconductor alliance known as Chip 4, Fab 4, because the industry is in their hands, and without having access to microprocessors, neither China nor Russia can really actually win many wars they plan to. And in terms of politics and probably security as well, this Quad alliance between Japan and Australia, India, and United States perhaps should be added by 2 more members, Republic of Korea and Republic of China, the 2 brothers in arms from the previous Cold War in which we live right now. So sorry to disappoint you. That's my current analysis. I hope I'm mistaken, and I will try to answer the questions later.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Petrov. That was a very comprehensive view of the economic opportunities in the context of politics and security, and also grateful for your insights about the Ukraine and Russia. So look forward to your more PowerPoints from you. You're always ready with, and they're very much appreciated. So thanks for the contribution and the inputs. It's very important. Next speaker is Mr. Hyun-seung Lee, who escaped from North Korea when he was 29 years old. He engaged in trade and economic relations between China and North Korea through his managerial role in a business entity under the DPRK regime. It's really interesting to me was the chairman of the Kim Il-sung Socialist Youth League at the Dongbei University in Dalian, China. A series of brutal purges by Kim Jong-un forced him and his entire family to defect in late 2014. As with other speakers, Hyun-seung is sought after by the media in the United States for his direct experience and understanding of the DPRK. We're glad to have you with us. You have the floor, Mr. Lee.
Thank you, John. Good evening, Korea, and good morning, America. Today, the issue of reunification on the Korean Peninsula seems to be left out of Korea's national interest and becoming increasingly forgotten in our memories. In this sense, I'm so grateful for Global Peace Foundation and its partners for their persistent commitment to a free and unified Korea. Unfortunately, it is true that implementing the reunification policy amid various challenges such as denuclearization of North Korea and human rights problems is very tough. However, it is sad that the Yoon administration has yet to have clear vision for reunification. Also, we should be very cautious about the new administration's attempts to follow the failed policies that have no new breakthroughs for the inter-Korean dialogue and exchanges. In particular, the way of solving the North Korean nuclear program and finding a solution to the reunification by pursuing an inter-Korean summit using humanitarian aid to North Korea as a bait seems no different from previous failed attempts by the progressive South Korean governments. In addition, the Green Detente policy, which aims to promote coexistence and co-prosperity of the 2 Koreas and to build a foundation for peaceful unification by easing tensions and creating trust in non-political, non-military, ecology, and environmental fields, is just unrealistic. This is because North Korea is a country where politics and ideology dominate the people and their lives. And it is an environment in which no policy can be conceived apart from politics, ideology, and military concept. Therefore, I'd like to take this opportunity to highlight the limitations and failures of the past South Korean government's policy towards North Korea and talk about the policies and directions that the new administration can implement toward the goal of free and unified Korea. Without doubt, the human rights issue in North Korea should be the top priority of unification policy. But today, I would like to propose realistic and productive economic cooperation policy besides human rights and North Korea's nuclear issue. When we talk about inter-Korean economic cooperation, there are two models that cannot be left out: the Kaesong Industrial Complex and the Mountain Gumgang tourism. The idea of these two economic cooperation models was good, but the implementation of these two policies completely failed. The fact that the profit of these two economic cooperation models were used only for the regime's nuclear development and then military maintenance, and that they did not contribute the lives of people, and the failure to achieve practical people-to-people exchanges between North and South Korean indicate a complete failure of the policy. I would suggest several policies that can be implemented more centered on the North Korean people while avoiding repeating past policy failures and making the North Korean regime interested. First, the dispatch of the North Korean workers abroad is one of the top interests of the North Korean regime. It is one of the most promoted policies to the extent of considering sending laborers to the Donbas region of Ukraine, which is currently at war. I believe that the South Korean government can take advantage of the North's policy and make a bold proposal to Kim Jong-un that the South Korean companies will hire North Korean workers in South Korea rather than in North Korea's area, such as the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Inviting and hiring North Korean workers to South Korea allows South Korean companies to directly pay North Korean workers, and the North Koreans can see the reality of South Korea with their own naked eyes and interact with South Korean people in a more free environment. In addition, by paying workers directly to their bank accounts, we can reduce the amount of money flow into the regime as much as possible and improve the quality of workers' life, and as well as create a more suitable environment for them to learn about the liberal democracy and the market economy. Second, energy inter-Korean cooperation to resolve the North Korea's power shortage has notably sufficient conditions to attract attention of the North Korean regime. North Korea's actual electricity production is 23 billion kilowatt hour, which is only 4% of South Korea's power generation. The power shortages, more chronically severe than food shortages, have a greater impact on the overall North Korea's economy and the lives of its residents. Without electricity, the basic means to develop the economy, factories are being stopped, production cannot be made, and there can be no capital to buy food. Economic cooperation through North Korea's electricity supply is an area that needs to be cooperated in order to improve the quality of lives and North Koreans and to achieve a free and unified Korea in the future. However, North Korea's nuclear power plant construction plan and electricity infrastructure plan promoted by the Moon Jae-in administration were dangerous measures that could give Kim Jong-un all the power and benefits. Instead of building small model nuclear power plants in North Korea, build them in South Korea, limit the North Korean power supply to factories that produce daily necessities, food production, and raw material production process, and thoroughly exclude munition factories, military facilities, and the party and government agency buildings. We need let South Korean government, not the North Korean regime, do the planning and control the power supply chain. Also, electricity should not be provided for free, but must be paid for through natural resources exchange or various other means. Furthermore, there may be various ways to minimize the influence of the North Korean regime in policies using the tourism industry and cooperation in the IT sector, which are Kim Jong-un's interest as well. Of course, these proposals have the disadvantage of not being able to proceed unless Kim Jong-un opens the country and accepts them. However, cooperation that is only benefit the Kim Jong-un regime will further distance the freedom of North Korean people and the reunification of Korean Peninsula. The long-term goal of any inter-Korean economic cooperation should be a free, unified Korea, and economic cooperation does not share the principle of reciprocity and the free market values should be firmly excluded. Moreover, when designing inter-Korean economic cooperation, the North Korean regime's authority should be minimized, the benefits of the Korean people should be maximized, and the South Korean government should be able to control them as much as possible. As President Hyun-seung Lee said in his inauguration speech, we should pursue a sustainable peace that blooms freedom and prosperity, not a fragile peace that temporarily avoids the war. Likewise, the reunification policy is truly meaningful, will be truly meaningful only when it develops into sustainable cooperation in freedom and prosperity, not cooperation for the temporary dialogue. Once again, thank you to the organizer and the sponsors for providing the amazing platform. John, you are muted.
Yes, thank you very much, Hyun-seung. Those are, you made some very practical recommendations based on very personal experience with North Korea. And we look forward to developing those a little more. Also, I wanted to, several times today we heard about the mountain resort developments in the north, and Hyun-seung's father was part of Office 39 that did develop those resorts, and so he has a lot of. And by the way, his book will be out soon, I think, published shortly. So looking forward to that. But appreciate the background and your commitment, Hyun-seung, and also another point, he's been building a network, expanding a network of escapees of Koreans living in the north that can really make an impact. So look forward to watching your personal trajectory, and thanks for those suggestions. Our next speaker is Dr. Nanjin Dorjsuren. He's the founding director of the Mongolian Institute of Northeast Asian Security and Strategy. Because of Mongolia's unique role as a neutral platform in Northeast Asia, Dr. Dorjsuren also has direct experience with the DPRK. Having earned advanced degrees in these countries, Dorjsuren's expertise includes Korean Peninsula issues, China, and Japan. He's brilliant. Please welcome to our panel, Dr. Nanjin Dorjsuren.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for a nice introduction. It is a well-known fact that the political and security conflicts in Northeast Asia region are a major obstacle of the development of economic cooperation in the region. And therefore, the previous speakers of the conference have clearly expressed their position and outlined the political and security issues of the region. I will not go into the general issues of the region, but would like to share my views about which sections require more attention in order to make economic cooperation in the region. And firstly, I think the issue of energy cooperation. Our previous speaker mentioned about the energy sector is a strategically important sector for any country today, and which ensures national security and independence. And I'd like to share a little bit Mongolian case. The number of electricity consumers of Mongolia has increased dramatically in recent years. And also in connection with the situation of the coronavirus, the government of Mongolia initiated programs to fully and partly unify the payments for electricity and heating. However, there was a risk of a sharp and sudden increase in the consumption load among the consumers. And according to experts, it is expected that the country would face difficulties in terms of energy supply in the future. And I think the modern and renewable energy supply, I think is especially main factor for sustainable development of the country. And during his visit early this month, Chinese Foreign Minister and Mongolian Foreign Minister signed a memorandum of a cross-border railway connection between the two countries. And moreover, the parties agreed to advance the construction of a hydropower plant, and officials believe that the signing of the memorandum by the parties creates the legal basis of the construction of a cross-border railway between the two countries. And also the construction of a hydropower plant has an opportunity to provide energy to the western region of my country. And secondly, I'd like to share about the issue of regional cooperation between in the region. And we all know usually cooperation issues start from the state agencies on intergovernmental level, and the regional or provincial agencies follow the path covered by the centralized power. And the idea of, for example, bottom-up approach of economic integration is not a complete novelty. And the ADB, Asian Development Bank, and also the Economic Research Institute of Northeast Asia both propose a possible sub-regional cooperation. For example, ADB's briefing paper on cooperation of Xiamen Prefecture of Inner Mongolia, Autonomous region, and also eastern provinces of Mongolia, Dornot, Khenti, and Sukbator of Mongolia. I think this is the idea that administrative units of different countries could have more possibilities of cooperation. Also, it does not abolish the intergovernmental cooperation. In case of Mongolia, we see Mongolia as a suitable candidate for exhibiting the projects of bottom-up economic cooperation in the region. Firstly, Mongolia doesn't have any border disputes with other countries of the Northeast Asia region. And secondly, Mongolia's cooperation with other countries doesn't have heavy political and historical influences. And therefore, it's more than favorable for Mongolia and other countries in the Northeast Asia region to realize inter-province economic cooperation through various projects. And Eastern Mongolia's three provinces, as I mentioned, Dornot, Khenti, and Sukbator, are the closest territories to the Northeast Asian region. And previously in 2019, for example, a number of forums were held in Khenti province of Mongolia, such as GTI, the local cooperation committee meeting was held, and also local cooperation committee logistics subcommittees meetings. And for Mongolian case, possible sectors of cooperation could include first tourism and mining and agriculture. Agriculture plays a major role of Mongolia. It has strong tradition built agriculture with over 67 million animals, including horses, camels, and part of the eastern region of Mongolia also has a wide variety of minerals, but the best prospects of the current future exploration of coal and uranium and other metals. And next sector for possible cooperation is inter-province tourism. And a visible example of such cooperation would be represented by a Great Tea Road initiative by Russia, China, and Mongolia. And the initiative follows the idea of a bottom-up approach, integrates inter-province cooperation in tourism sector. And according to the data, the number of tourists has arrived Mongolia, for example, in 2019, pre-pandemic times reached almost 600,000 tourists per year. And top countries of the visitors, China, Russia, South Korea, Japan. These countries all are from Northeast Asian region. And finally, I'd like to say that the issue of cooperation between non-governmental and independent organizations in the country, the countries of the region, I think very important. Today, I think today's event is a positive sign of this, and also, as we all know, Mongolian president initiated Ulaanbaatar Dialogue of Northeast Asian Security, and the 7th international meeting was held in June of this year. Since after the 2 years hiatus of the complications of the coronavirus, and to look back the history since 1980s, almost 2080s, Mongolia has consensually proposed the creation of a new dialogue of mechanism in the region. And since 2017, it has been conducted from level track 1.5 level, combines the official channels and also the experts and researchers. And I'd like to figure out that this year's conference included the 5 main sections. And this is just for your information that first topic was about challenges and opportunities in regional security. And second was about multilateral cooperation. And third, about a peaceful future of Northeast Asia. And fourth is a regional economic cooperation after the pandemic. And finally, about energy transition. And it shows a wide scope of a dialogue. And thank you very much. This is my small ideas to want to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dorj. And you brought up similar themes, including power and importance of power and rail, and also economic cooperation, which includes tourism. All themes that have surfaced throughout our forum today, and also happy to have you participate because you'll be hosting our delegates from this forum and other friends on September 21 to 23, I believe, for a very important dialogue in this fascinating platform, very neutral one in Mongolia. So everybody here is invited and welcome, and George will take good care of us, I think, when we get there. So thank you for your presentation, Dr. Dorjsuren. And look forward to seeing you next month. Appreciate that. Our final speaker today is Mr. Sourabh Gupta. He's a resident senior fellow at the Institute for China-America Studies in Washington, D.C. He's a senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist with 2 decades of Washington-based experience in a think tank and political risk research and advisory capacity. Sourabh contributes a great deal of clear investment in maritime law with our tourism, culture, and sport working group that mentioned earlier that he's been working with for over a year now. And we're very happy to have you with us. Dr. Gupta, you have the floor.
Thank you, John, for the introduction, and thank you for the important platform of the International Forum on One Korea. I'm going, right now, in terms of China, South Korea relations, there are a number of issues in that relationship, and the difficult issues, like Dr. Petrov had mentioned, the issue of THAAD and the 3 no's, not obviously North Korea's provocative behavior, as well as the issue of supply chains and the Chip 4 alliance that the US is trying to construct. I will not touch on South Korea-China relations. What I am going to do is actually go in a fairly different direction from most of the speakers today and contemplate a scenario wherein North Korea has actually collapsed and collapsed in a heap very suddenly. And of course, North Korea has shown that it's a champion in kind of levitating literally 2 inches above the ground. It can fall from 30,000 feet, but North Korea never kind of hits the ground and smashes. It levitates just that little bit above the ground, and the the Kims have managed to retain power, and obviously North Korea is doing terribly, but it's still, the regime survives. But anyway, I am contemplating an environment where North Korea actually collapses in a heap and collapses very, very suddenly, say if there's a second Korean War on the peninsula, because tensions are going up out there. And in this context, what I wanted to do is then look at a parallel case, which was German unification, reunification, the collapse of East Germany in a sense, and which happened very quickly. And then economic decisions had to be made very soon. And so my point out here, let me back up a little bit. During the Moon Jae-in period, we could think in terms of another example, say Vietnam, the unification of North and South Vietnam, and thereafter its gradual integration economically into the international community. And Mr. Steffensen has talked about the important roles of IFIs in that context. Where I am going out here is in terms, as I said, North Korea collapsing very quickly, a prior example, which would be German reunification. And what I wanted to leave you all, everybody with, is just one single idea of one single big mistake that was made in German reunification, and which should therefore not, from an economic policy standpoint, and therefore should not be, one should be very careful when one thinks ahead in terms of what next after North Korea has collapsed and a free and united Korea has come into being. But obviously, North Korea needs to be rehabilitated economically. I would suggest that there were 2 very important policy decisions which were made immediately at the time of East Germany's collapse, which had an outsized importance in terms of East Germany's future prospect. One A was the decision to convert the East and West German currencies at a 1-to-1 parity, when the effective exchange rate at that point of time between East and West German currencies was 4.3 to 1, 4 to 1. And the second issue, the second economic policy decision, which had an outsized impact, was the demand for wage equalization between East and West Germany sought by employers associations and labor unions in West Germany. Now, it is generally thought that it was this 1-to-1 parity which really hurt East German industrial development once Germany was reunified. The powerful German central bank, the Bundesbank itself, had demanded that it should be a 2-to-1 parity at best, but it was overruled by political masters, Helmut Kohl, et cetera, et cetera. But that having been said, even if it was at 1-to-1. What it did effectively do was to raise the relative hourly wages in East Germany to about 30% of the West German level. And yes, that was a wage level that was not reflective of East Germany's productive capability or labor productivity. But a 30% of West German wage level was really, it was unhelpful, but not terribly damaging. And considering that the human capital in East Germany was very, very good, it could obviously have sucked in a lot of foreign investment and at that wage level done very well from an industrial standpoint. The single biggest, in my view, villain of the economic peace during German reunification was the demand for wage equalization. Now it didn't become equal to East German levels, but it was significantly ratcheted up. From the perspective of West German business associations, this demand was driven by the desire to prevent international investors. At that point of time, it was essentially prevent Japanese investors from snapping up technically valuable but inexpensively valued East German companies, and thereafter outcompeting West German companies on product and price in Germany itself. There was a protectionist interest in the thinking of the West German business associations. Simultaneously, from the perspective of West German labor unions, their demand simply was to protect local jobs. If the wage rate is that much lower in East Germany, they were going to be far more competitive, and a lot of lower level jobs would essentially exit in a variety of sectors. And essentially the East German labor unions, and we have in Germany this cooperative setup, so they have a lot of bargaining power politically, and their demand was for an immediate rise of 60% of East Germany's wage level to 60% of West Germany's wage level. And that's a tremendous rise, and thereafter the wage level kept going up to about 70, 80, 85%. And this, I would say, was the biggest villain of the economic peace in terms of German reunification and nurturing East German economy to become industrially competitive thereafter. The effect of the overvaluation of East Germany's labor market, with real wages vastly in excess of its productivity levels, essentially led to stagnation and widespread unemployment in East Germany, in what was East Germany. Indeed, 25 years after reunification, 3/4 of the industrial jobs in what was East Germany was lost. And what this, in fact, thereafter necessitated was large-scale transfer payments from West Germany, largely in the form of unemployment benefits, as well as early retirement pensions for people who were retiring early. And the purpose of this was to discourage outmigration to West Germany. So you see how creating this artificial wage rate in effect made East Germany unproductive, led to unemployment, and led thereafter to the incentives to migrate out to West Germany. And to prevent that migration, huge amounts of transfer payments then came from West Germany to East Germany, which was essentially was part of the huge cost and burden of German reunification. And as many as 15 years later, after reunification, transfers from West to East Germany continued to account for more than 20% or 25% of West German consumption. And so let me quickly then go to what these implications are for South Korea. Obviously, there are no economic shortcuts during unification. For North Korea to develop industrially, it will need to have wages commensurate to what its local productive capacity is. There should be no hasty adjustment of wages upwards in the euphoria of unification. Obviously, North and South Korean wages will never equalize because the gap is so huge. But that said, just the trying to get North Korea's wages up to a level which is not commensurate with its labor capacity is just going to hurt North Korea industrially and lead to unemployment out there, when the particular goal is to actually haul North Korea up by its bootstraps from the bottom up. One also has to, in this context, say that population movements will strongly have to be discouraged too, and because we saw in the German case of the transfer payments which were made to basically keep them in place, and so there needs to be some coercive means to keep populations in place. Next, North Korea should be treated, I would say, as a single large SEZ, a special economic zone within a unified Korea, with an investment-led growth strategy built on low wages, productivity, and secure property rights, the property rights regime which is imported from South Korea. What East Germany could not do in terms of its industrial development capacity by having investment, foreign investment really jumpstart growth in East Germany, or even German investment jumpstart growth because of overvalued wage levels, that mistake should not be made in South Korea, in North Korea. I'll add one further point, and that is that, you know, when reunification does happen, a free and united Korea does happen, there will be a lot of open property claims with regard to restitution and all, and these need to be sought and resolved quickly, ideally in cash. This was something which hurt Germany because there was a lot of restitution claims even going back to the Nazi period, and the essence of this is to have speedy, clear assignment of property rights, so then property can be pledged as collateral for industrial development. So this becomes an important point to realize. And my final parting point would be that, you know, during the highs of a free and united Korea, beware of the lows of self-interested behavior by Koreans themselves, as was the case with German business associations, West German business associations, and labor unions who sought to protect their fief and in the end hurt the larger long-term interests of East German workers, and which could well happen in North Korea too. So just wanted to leave with that point, contemplating something that is not worth contemplating, a complete collapse in North Korea, because one never knows what can happen in that situation. But let's contemplate that and then see what we can pluck out from Germany, German reunification and the economic ideas. And certainly let's avoid the worst of those ideas, which was that elevated and artificial wage level, which really hurt North Korea's, East Germany's economic development. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sourabh. That's very helpful. I think the focus on East-West Germany is important and instructive. And of course, as you mentioned, it's a much more dramatic difference between North and South Korea than even was with East and West Germany, but we should learn lessons from there. You know, I appreciate all of your comments there, and we hopefully can dig into those in the future as we move along. I think that these processes need to be considered in advance and not at the last minute. And I think it's really good advice to learn from the mistakes before. This will be a huge challenge. With the, of course, North-South Korea. And also you mentioned we really don't know, you know, the world has been turning on a dime lately and going here and there. And I think things could change quite dramatically in North Korea. We no idea how, but there needs to be these processes considered in advance. So thank you very much for those comments. Sourabh has a very global perspective built in because he, of course, from India. He's lived in America at least 20 years and dealing with these policy questions. And he's married to a wonderful lady from Japan. So he also has American children, and he's sits on the U.S.-China Institute, so he's quite familiar with the China question, and really appreciate that broad background and perspective. Thank you very much. That completes our presentations. We have a few minutes here for to discuss some questions. Some came up. Ambassador Eng-sek-han from Mongolia asked about the Greater Tumen Initiative, what broke down there 30 years ago. Dr. Park, if you could help us with that, and what nation was it, and what how that could be. It's fascinating you brought that up in a very different, with a different perspective and light on it, I think, but that regional approach is of course very promising. Dr. Ambassador Eng-sek-han did wonder what would ask, I think he knows, but what was the breakdown in that and why it wasn't effective to date? Could you help us with that, Dr. Park? You're muted there.
With the Ukraine crisis still going on, I believe the possibility of finding a breakthrough for the Korean Peninsula issue is low. And now, as the war between Russia and Ukraine wages on, North Korea and Russia are cooperating very closely, so much so that they look like they form an alliance. And a case in point is the cooperation between the two countries to allow North Korea to send its workforce to the Donbas region. So, if Russia and North Korea work more closely regarding the Ukraine crisis, this will not positively affect the Korean Peninsula issue. Also, North Korea has conducted nuclear tests, and there is a possibility that these tests might lead to some tangible results in North Korea, and Western countries have to be prepared for that. And in whatever case, we need to make sure that North Korea will suspend its nuclear tests. To that end, sanctions against North Korea or our approach to North Korea need to be more conciliatory. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Park. And for sure, North Korea was dropping out, really slowed down the energy in that initiative. But I think the regional approach is really critical, and look forward to, as you develop that approach moving forward. Since Dr. Dorjsuren brought up about what was it? Sorry. You know, the IFIs, looking at East and West, I'm sorry, that was Sourabh talking about East and West Germany and the integration there and the problems, the mistakes made at that time. I was wondering about the IFIs being, Craig, you mentioned how North Korea would have to join the IFIs and how right now they're not a member, and that would be a very slow process, and especially if it was undertaken in the moment when there was an opportunity rather than in advance. But when in the integration of East and West Germany, was East Germany, I assume, wasn't a member of of those IFIs? And then was the process just not to have them join and then have unification, but did that happen simultaneously? And how does that, could that work with North and South Korea rather than North Korea going through the process of getting membership, getting shares from other countries? But could this new unified Korea be considered just expanding South Korea's membership and to this new country? How might that, what would be the difference there?
Yeah, that's a good question, John. I've looked into it a little bit, and I don't have any information on the East-West German deal.
I see.
But I know that China was a founding member of the World Bank back in 1945. And after the Civil War broke out, China's membership was suspended, and that membership was transferred to Taipei, Taiwan, where they became a member of the World Bank until 1980, when the World Bank ended that relationship, and also in 1980 began a new relationship with the PRC. So it wasn't, how should I say it? There's a case of transferring a membership from China to Taiwan, but rather than transferring it back, that relationship was ended and a new relationship was begun. I'm just reading between the lines here, but it is 2022, and probably handing a membership from one to the other, or subsuming a former country under a new, reunification type exercise would be difficult to do. I think that anything and everything that's required on the part of a new member to join would probably be required of the North. But let's do some more work in that area and find out. I'm not certain of what I'm saying.
Right. I think we should be really important to look into that, because if we wait until there is a disruption or a regime collapse or something very sudden, it just will be a disaster to try to scramble at the last minute like that. And I had one more question.
If I could just footnote.
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that there are things that could be done now. I mean, that was a point that I really tried to make clear. That would shorten whatever period is required if and when North Korea is eligible for membership in the IFI community. And it would save a lot of time. It really would. It could save years worth of work. But it's really sort of the ball's in the North's court. They really have to take some steps to get the ball rolling.
I see. I hope we can get the ball rolling, or a few balls rolling here as soon. And as I mentioned in the earlier sessions, the plenary and the first session on security, economy came up very frequently, and I think there really is an energy and a desire to and respect for that that maybe hadn't surfaced earlier. But I think there's time. It's coming time now. We can really put together some recommendations and policies that can be implemented, or ready to implement anyhow. Some maybe can be, but some just need to be ready to go. Does anybody here? I don't see any other questions from the audience. Does anybody here have a comment or question for one another? There's a lot to follow up on here. Fantastic recommendations, considerations, and again, this is a very critical component of the realization of a free unified Korea. So, yeah, Sourabh?
I just wanted to second Hyun-seung's point, which was, I thought, a very, very important one in terms of electricity supply and having that electricity
Right.
based in South Korea and transmitted to North Korea. Yeah, of course, we know dealing with the regime is not easy, and they can just say no, and that's the end of it. But I thought that was very, very useful. And as Mr. Steffensen said, we do have cases like Vietnam, like Myanmar, where there is initial progress and movement towards trying to get these guys the regime work on more market-oriented perspectives. And they understand the value of that folks like the bank bring to the table because of the general impartiality in terms of actually dealing with the substance of the matter. And that's why on these these practical solutions, I mean, they move forward. These need to move forward and move forward quickly, because it's ultimately at the end of the day, the policy framework, the policy regime that will matter, rather than individual projects per se. And if one can get this overall regime working better and have practical ideas in this regard, I think you kickstart a lot, regardless of whether North Korea collapses or the person stays indefinitely.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. That was a fascinating proposal, Hyun-seung, and especially besides providing electricity, it was providing electricity that went to manufacturing things that the people needed, not just electricity to the regime. So Hyun-seung, do you have any follow-up, or have you presented that to anybody yet, your proposal about?
No, I don't think it's my first time present those ideas. The Gasong industrial complex model, like, pay directly to North Korean workers, I mentioned several times to, yes, government agencies and the South Korean scholars and experts, but the electricity model was it's my first time to present.
I see.
Yeah.
I think we should follow up on those. They're very important. Leonid, sure.
Yes, John, and Hyun-seung, and spot on. Of course, it's good idea to provide brothers and sisters with electricity. Just make sure that if they start bombing South Korea or shelling it, they don't hit one of the numerous nuclear power plants like Russians are doing these days to the Ukrainian brothers and sisters. And they don't, Putin does not need even use to a nuclear device or nuclear bomb. They simply can, detonate, put some explosives nearby or inside the facilities of the nuclear power plants and go and leave it to and start blackmailing and extorting whatever they want, because this is really scary scenario. So that's just my comment. Sorry for being grim.
No worries, no worries. But as you probably know, China and Russia are the most building nuclear power plants in the world. So, but their plan is beyond our imagination. So they're trying to dominate nuclear power plant. Industry. So I think, it won't be a problem for, South Korea and US alliance, especially US the military presence in South Korea. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Western infatuation with green energy also is an inhibiting factor in really being able to engage and support these developing economies. Honestly, so I think that, and that came up pretty universally about power and energy as well as rail, and then finance. Dr. Nam's inputs about the new financial hub of in Yoido is fascinating. And are there any other, we're kind of getting close to our conclusion here. Is there any other thoughts or questions or recommendations? I'm really looking forward to following up on there's so many good proposals, recommendations, and things to consider that came up this evening or this morning. I'm very excited about following up on each of those, maybe building a meeting around each of those presentations. Anybody, Craig?
Yeah, John, one of the things that could be done, should be done, is to establish a trust fund somewhere so that some of the work that could be carried out now instead of later is funded. And I'm not talking about ADB, World Bank, IMF staff. I'm talking about scholars and people in NGOs and Good Samaritans and others who are willing to do the dirty work, so that when the day comes that the rest of us can take hold of that information and process it, it's ready. But if there was some fund out there that groups interested in what we're talking about today could turn to cover airfare and a few days of work and the cost of engaging some counterparts in Seoul or wherever to work with them, Mongolia, China, that would be wonderful. I think it would really help a lot.
I agree. I think that's, let's put together a proposal for that and shop it around, see if we can get some. Right, okay. Yeah, for sure. That's I like that a lot, and not waiting, because the big institutions move so slowly, as you are very well aware, and are limited in even what they can suggest and study. So that would give us a lot of flexibility and entrepreneurial power that wouldn't exist otherwise. That's a very good suggestion. Dr. Nam, can we depend on your financial hub to support this trust fund that Craig just recommended? No, you're muted. I would love to hear a final word from ROK there, Dr. Nam.
Yeah. That's a good idea. Thank you. So I would like to connect the trust fund located in Yoido Special Zone.
Sounds good. This Yoido development we're in right now.
Especially Park 1.
Yeah. Oh, that's where this conference is being held. It's a brand new complex here with a huge mall and towers. And my original career was architecture, and I'm not easily impressed by a lot of what I see in the commercial world. But this project is down to the details, the very fine details, remarkable and integrated beautifully, almost from any angle. So and also it had a very fascinating finance structure. This project itself was very challenging and pioneered a new kind of finance that we might study also and look at applying more broadly. Well, I really want to thank everybody. Everyone has contributed tremendously to this very important question. Again, it's been all of these. Dr. Petrov's presentation pointed out the economic component next to the political and the security, and really the foundation is the economic one, and those others are handled differently. But we need to pioneer and work forward, and it can't go the other way around. It's ironic, but we always thought we have to deal with the political issues, the security issues, before we get to the economics. But I think we need to turn that model on its head and move forward and develop some proposals and perspectives that will move those other political and security questions through this dynamic development, economic development. So a lot to chew on here, a lot to follow up on, and I really very much, and I'm sure I want to appreciate the audience, whether you're here watching now internationally or Those watching the recording of this, we're grateful for your participation. Look forward to your suggestions, recommendations, and questions also. Let's keep this initiative moving forward together to make a free and unified Korea. We can do it. Thank you very much, everybody.